A millionaire took a homeless woman to his ex-fiancée's wedding, and what she did shocked everyone. Before watching the video, please leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Maybe you're sipping your morning coffee. Maybe the sun's already set and you're winding down for the evening. Wherever you are, just listen closely. Because this story, this one right here, is about a man who thought he had everything until one letter and one stranger turned his whole world upside down. Graham Whitaker sat alone in his high-rise office, staring blankly at the gilded envelope in his hand. The late afternoon sun poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off the edge of his heavy oak desk, casting shadows that seemed to mock the turmoil in his chest. His fingers tightened around the envelope, crinkling the expensive paper. A wedding invitation. From her. From Camille. He scoffed bitterly, setting it down with a cold slap on the table. "Is this a joke?" he muttered to no one. His voice was low, sharp with disbelief. Camille Harrington, the woman who had once promised to spend forever with him, who had left without warning, without mercy, for a man with a more acceptable image, was now inviting him to watch her pledge her life to someone else. Someone, he had no doubt, her father had approved of. The nerve, the absolute audacity. Moments later, the door to his office opened. In strolled his longtime friend and business partner, Julian Marks, holding 2 coffee cups and his usual mischievous grin. "Mail call," he said, setting a cup in front of Graham and spotting the envelope. His eyes widened. "Wait, is that what I think it is?" Graham didn't answer. He didn't need to. Julian whistled, slow and low. "Wow, that's a bold move. Are you going?" Graham leaned back in his leather chair and let out a dry laugh. "And show up alone, looking like the one who lost? Not a chance." Julian smirked. "Then don't go alone. Find someone. Show her you've moved on too." The suggestion hung in the air like a spark waiting to catch. Graham's mind raced. The idea wasn't bad, but showing up with just anyone wouldn't be enough. If he was going to do this, he had to make it unforgettable. That evening, still stewing in the storm of memories and humiliation, Graham stepped out of his building, heading toward his car. The night air was crisp, a gentle wind carrying the scent of city streets and distant jasmine. As he walked, something, or rather someone, caught his eye. There, on the curb just outside a modest diner, sat a young woman. Her clothes were tattered, her hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of what might have been yesterday's coffee. Her dark hair, tangled and wild, framed a face that was too proud, too fierce to match her circumstances. Their eyes met for just a second, but in that sliver of a moment, Graham saw something he hadn't expected. Defiance. Not desperation, not pleading, just a quiet challenge. On impulse, as if pulled by something deeper than logic, Graham changed course and walked toward her. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets. "Do you need money?" he asked, his voice low and steady. The woman didn't look up at first. Then, with a calm grace that felt almost rehearsed, she raised her eyes to meet his. Her gaze was sharp, calculating, but also curious. She raised an eyebrow and gave a half smile. "What is this?" she asked coolly. "Some kind of social experiment? You asked me that question, and depending on how I answer, you either toss a bill or walk away with a guilty conscience?" Graham was taken aback. He blinked. No one talked to him like that. Not anymore. "I have a proposition," he said, trying to keep control of the moment. "Come with me to an event. I'll pay you enough to start over." She tilted her head, that sly smile never leaving her lips. "Start over? Do you always pitch life-changing offers to strangers on the street? Or is this just when you're feeling particularly noble?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't walk away. Something about her, a fire beneath the dirt, a dignity behind the sarcasm, kept him rooted. "You'll just need to dress up, smile, be by my side, that's it." "Oh, I see," she replied, standing slowly and brushing the dust from her skirt. "You want a doll, something shiny to parade around so your ex thinks you've moved on." Graham exhaled, both irritated and impressed. "If you're not interested, I'll find someone else." She stepped closer. So close he could see the flecks of amber in her eyes. "Oh, I'm interested," she said, her voice softer now, but still teasing. "But only because I'm curious." "Curious about what?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. to see how far a man like you is willing to go, just to make a point. Graham didn't know it yet, but in that moment, under the flickering streetlight, beside a woman whose name he didn't even know, his life quietly began to change. He had meant to prove something to Camille. He thought he was playing the game, but what he hadn't realized was that he had just met someone who wasn't a pawn. She would be the one to upend everything. Now, friends, if you were with us for the beginning, you know that Graham Whitaker made a bold move. He didn't just attend his ex-fiancée's wedding. He brought someone unexpected. A woman he'd found sitting outside a diner with windblown hair and eyes that held more fire than fear. But what neither he nor anyone at that wedding was ready for was what she'd become by the time she walked through those golden doors. Her name was Alara. And this is the part of the story where everything changes. The morning of the wedding arrived like a curtain rising on a play no one had rehearsed. Graham stood in the salon's waiting area, surrounded by the hum of blow dryers and the scent of expensive shampoo, trying to focus, but his mind kept drifting. It had been hours since he'd last seen Alara. She'd been taken behind heavy velvet curtains by a team of stylists who worked silently, almost reverently, like artists chiseling away stone to reveal a sculpture hidden beneath. And Graham, he was starting to wonder if he'd made a mistake. Maybe she wouldn't fit in after all. Maybe he'd built up some fantasy in his mind, a fairy tale glow around a woman who, by all logical standards, didn't belong at a high society event. His ex, Camille, would smell the charade from a mile away. The elite guests would whisper. Alara would be exposed. But just then, the curtain opened, and the woman who stepped out was not the same one he'd met on that sidewalk. Graham's breath caught in his throat. His hands fell to his sides. The room seemed to tilt just for a second. Alara, draped in a floor-length emerald silk gown, her hair cascading down in soft waves, lips painted the color of crushed berries, didn't just walk. She glided. Every step was purposeful, every glance a statement. Her presence swallowed the air in the room and left no space for doubt. He wasn't the only one stunned. Even the stylists, who worked with models and magnates, were frozen, watching her like a goddess descending from a forgotten myth. And what startled Graham the most? She didn't seem surprised. Alara turned to face the mirror, calmly adjusting a single pearl earring. Her expression was unreadable, not awed by her transformation, not overwhelmed by the extravagance. She looked at herself like someone who had worn this skin before. "You don't look shocked," Graham finally managed, voice hushed. Alara caught his reflection in the mirror and smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that made his stomach twist. "Why would I be? This isn't new to me." There was something about the way she said it, something that lingered like the echo of a secret. But before he could ask, the driver had arrived. It was time. The car ride to the venue was silent, but not uncomfortable. Alara sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap, her posture straight, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She wasn't fidgeting, wasn't nervous. If anything, she looked bored. "You really don't want to know where we're going?" Graham asked, trying to read her again. She glanced at him, that smile tugging at her lips once more. "A wedding, that much is obvious. You've got the eyes of a man who's about to walk into enemy territory." He chuckled despite himself. "You're not afraid?" Alara turned her face to the window again. "I've faced worse things than a ballroom full of judgment." And then the car rolled to a stop. Outside, cameras flashed. Diamonds glittered beneath the golden evening light. The who's who of society emerged from sleek black cars and gowns that cost more than some people's homes. Laughter filled the air, polished and fake. Graham stepped out first, adjusting his cufflinks, feeling a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. The weight of expectations, of appearances, of history. Then, Alara took his hand, and the world stopped turning. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Heads turned, eyes widened. There were gasps, soft but audible, as the mysterious woman by Graham's side walked forward, chin held high, her expression calm, almost serene. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "Where did she come from? Is that his new fiancé?" Alara didn't flinch. She walked like she owned the marble beneath her heels, like chandeliers bowed in her presence. And when they stepped inside the grand hall with its towering crystal columns and live orchestra playing the classics, She looked around, not in awe, but as if she were returning to a place she'd once abandoned. Camille spotted them almost instantly. Her perfect smile faltered. Her fingers, wrapped around her new fiancé's arm, twitched. And Graham, he saw it all. He saw the panic in Camille's eyes. The calculation, the jealousy. Her gaze flickered to Alara, analyzing, dissecting, trying to place her. But she couldn't, because Alara didn't belong in any box Camille had ever known. "William," Camille said, her voice brittle despite her best efforts. "You came." Graham smiled, just enough to be polite. "Of course I did. I wouldn't miss your big day." "And you brought—" Camille's words hung in the air like a dare. Before he could answer, Alara stepped forward with the grace of royalty. "Alara, a pleasure." Camille hesitated, then shook her hand. But the mask had already cracked. Because Alara wasn't playing pretend. She wasn't trying to belong. She was belonging. With every poised movement, every elegant reply, she owned that room. She mingled effortlessly, speaking about investment trends and international markets. When one of the city's biggest investors asked her what she did, she didn't stammer or stall. "I observe," she said, sipping her champagne, "and then I act. It's usually effective." And it was. By the time the toast began, Alara had become the mystery of the evening. Everyone wanted to know her. And Camille, well, Camille was unraveling, but what Alara did next truly left everyone breathless. As the newlyweds stood at the center of the ballroom, receiving applause, Alara leaned in just slightly and said, with perfect timing, "Marriage is a sacred vow. I remember mine, or at least the one that never happened." His family didn't think I was a good fit. There was silence, cold, heavy silence. Camille's face went pale, because Alara wasn't just any woman Graham had found. She had a past, a story, and she'd chosen this moment, this room, to begin telling it. And friends, that's only the beginning. You see, Alara had walked in to play a role, but what she revealed that night would shake the very foundation of everyone in that room. She wasn't there for attention. She wasn't there for pity. She was there for the truth. So don't go anywhere, because what comes next is the part where secrets begin to unravel, lies lose their power, and a woman who was once forgotten becomes an unforgettable. And by the end of this story, I promise you'll never look at a stranger on the sidewalk the same way again. Stay with me. The best is still to come. Dear listener, what you're about to hear is the part of the story that makes your heart ache. The part where you realize that behind every poised smile, behind every graceful gesture, there might be a wound, deep, quiet, and waiting for justice. Alara didn't come to the wedding simply to play a part. No, she came carrying memories like scars stitched into silk, wearing elegance like armor. From the moment she stepped into that grand ballroom, Camille's world began to tremble. Because Alara wasn't just beautiful, she was familiar. Too familiar. Camille Harrington had always been the queen of perception. She built her life like a castle, polished, guarded, towering. But castles crumble when they're built on lies. And Alara was the first crack in the stone. Camille's eyes followed Alara all evening, though she tried to hide it behind champagne flutes and polite laughter. But no amount of rehearsal could prepare her for what Alara would say next. It happened during the couple's first dance. As soft music filled the room, guests stood in admiration. Camille swayed in the arms of her new husband, her smile camera ready. That's when Alara leaned in toward Graham and whispered just loud enough to be heard by those near them. "I remember when I was supposed to have a night like this." Several heads turned. Camille's eyes locked on her, uncertain now, flickering with something colder than nerves. Alara raised her glass. "To the happy couple," she said, her tone calm but unmistakably edged. "May their union be built on truth, not transactions." Silence fell like frost across the room. A few guests chuckled nervously. Camille tried to maintain her composure, but a ghost of recognition passed through her eyes. That night, whispers followed Alara like shadows. "Who is she?" they asked again. "How does she know Camille?" But the truth, the truth was far darker than anyone could have imagined. Alara wasn't a stranger to this world. Years ago, she had a name that once echoed through the very halls she now walked through in disguise. She had been Alara Dalton, daughter of Gregory Dalton, real estate magnate, philanthropist, a man once trusted by everyone, including Camille's powerful family. Alara had been raised on fine china and trust funds. She had attended the same schools, sat at the same charity galas, and danced under the same chandeliers as Camille. They had once been friends. But that was before betrayal, before greed, before everything was taken. You see, Gregory Dalton believed in loyalty. He had taken young Camille under his wing when she was fresh out of business school. Brilliant, ambitious, and hungry. He brought her into his company like family, trusted her with access, contracts, and more, and she used it. Used it to siphon money from the company, to forge his name, or to reroute investments. And when the authorities began sniffing around, Camille disappeared, leaving Gregory to face the storm alone. The scandal erupted, headlines screamed corruption, investors fled, and within weeks, Alara's world fell apart. They lost their home, their name, their peace. Her father, unable to bear the shame, suffered a stroke. He never recovered. Alara watched the strongest man she knew crumble in a hospital bed, humiliated, broken, not by the press, not by the court, but by betrayal. A betrayal with a pearl necklace and a smile. Her mother tried to hold things together but was diagnosed with cancer 6 months later. No insurance, no money. Alara sold everything she had, including her mother's wedding ring, just to keep her in treatment for one more round of chemo. And through it all, Camille Harrington was building her empire, marrying into power, buying penthouses, hosting galas. Alara had vanished from society, but not because she wanted to. She erased herself to survive. She changed her name, cut ties, and disappeared into the noise of the city. Some nights she slept in shelters. Other nights, she cleaned restaurants after closing just to afford instant noodles and medication. Her once soft hands grew calloused. Her voice, once practiced for speeches, grew quiet and guarded. But her spirit never gave up. And that night at the wedding, she wasn't just there for show. She was there for the truth. And Camille felt it closing in. Later that evening, in a quiet moment near the balcony, Camille approached her. The music faded into the background. They stood alone, shadows of their past selves flickering in the candlelight. "You dance well," Camille said, her voice tight. Alara smiled gently. "So do you." Camille tilted her head. "You speak well. You know how to carry yourself." "I appreciate the observation," Alara replied calmly. "It wasn't a compliment," Camille said, her eyes narrowing. "No," Alara said. "I didn't think it was." There was a beat of silence. A silent duel. "I feel like we've met before," Camille said slowly. Alara didn't flinch. "Do you?" "You remind me of someone," Camille continued, searching her face. "Someone I haven't seen in a long time." "People change," Alara replied softly. "Some for the better, some for the worse." Camille was rattled now. "Where do you know Graham from?" Alara smiled, an expression both mysterious and resolute. "It's more fun when that stays a mystery." Camille's composure cracked. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. "What do you want?" Alara leaned in, voice barely audible. "I want you to feel what it's like, to lose everything, to look around a room and wonder how many people know what you've done, to smile while your heart pounds, afraid the truth is coming." Camille's breath hitched. "This isn't over." "No," Alara whispered, "it's just beginning." And friends, it was. That night, as the guests danced and toasted under chandeliers, a new story was unfolding. One not of wealth or weddings, but of reckoning. Alara knew exposing Camille would take more than one bold appearance. It would take proof, it would take strategy, and it would take courage. But most of all, it would take time. She had waited years in silence. She could wait a little longer. And so, dear listener, if you've ever felt wronged, if you've ever been pushed aside or silenced by someone with more power, this is the chapter you hold close. Because Alara's story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming a voice that was stolen. It's about standing tall when the world expects you to kneel. And most of all, it's about turning pain into purpose. So stay with me, because the truth is rising. And in the chapters to come, you'll see what happens when a woman who's lost everything decides to fight back. Not with fists, but with grace, resilience, and the kind of strength only suffering can shape. Because Alara isn't finished yet. Not even close. Sometimes the truth arrives not with a whisper, but with a thunderclap. It doesn't knock politely, it breaks down the door. And when it enters a room, everything changes. Tonight we walk into that moment. A moment long awaited, painfully earned, and unforgiving in its power. It began with a file, a simple envelope, hand-delivered to Graham Whitaker's desk on a quiet morning, sealed in plain white. But inside was a storm. Graham had been restless for weeks. Ever since that evening at Camille's wedding, Alara's presence haunted his every thought. Her grace, her mystery, her pain. There was too much she hadn't said. Too much she tried to hide behind clever words and measured smiles. So he did what any man with resources and a restless heart would do. He hired someone to find the missing pieces. And now those pieces lay in his hands, shaking hands. The folder told a story, one written in ink, betrayal, and ruined lives. Alara wasn't just a beautiful stranger with a forgotten past. She was Alara Dalton, daughter of Gregory Dalton, once one of the most respected men in the construction industry. A man who was destroyed publicly by financial scandal. A man whose name was erased from skyscrapers and charity plaques. A man Graham once admired from afar, now a ghost, his legacy buried. And Camille Harrington, Graham's ex-fiancée, the woman who sent that wedding invitation like a dagger through his pride, she was at the center of it all. She wasn't just a polished socialite. She wasn't just a betrayer of hearts. She had destroyed a family. She had destroyed Alara. Graham read every page, his heart pounding. Forged documents, fake accounts, money funneled under Gregory Dalton's name. Camille's signature, sloppy but present, on deals no one had dared question at the time. When the house of cards collapsed, Camille walked away untouched. Gregory took the fall. Alara lost everything. She had vanished. Until now. Graham looked out over the city from his penthouse window, the skyline glittering like a lie. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about her. It was about giving Alara back her voice, the one that had been stolen by someone who had smiled in her face while twisting the knife. He called to her that night. "Meet me," he said, "please." Alara met him in the rooftop garden of his building. The wind was soft, the city lights glowing beneath them. She wore no makeup, no jewels, just herself. Strong, raw, real. Graham didn't speak right away. He handed her the file. She opened it slowly. Her fingers trembled. She read in silence, page after page. And when she was done, she said nothing. She just sat down. As if the truth, even though it wasn't new to her, still had weight. "She took everything," Alara whispered. "And no one believed me." "I believe you now," Graham said, his voice tight with emotion. "And I'm going to help you prove it to the world." She looked up at him, her eyes glassy. "Why?" "Because," he said, stepping closer, "you deserve to be heard. And because I should have seen it sooner." That's when the plan began. They decided to confront Camille, not in private, not quietly, but in the most public way possible. Camille Harrington had built her power in front of an audience, and now she would fall in front of one. It was a gala hosted by the Harrington Foundation, Camille's pride and joy. Politicians, CEOs, media elites, they all attended, dressed in glittering gowns and hand-stitched tuxedos. Graham and Alara entered together, commanding attention the moment they arrived. Alara wore a black dress that shimmered with silver threads, her hair swept back like a queen returning to reclaim her throne. Her presence silenced the room. Camille saw her from across the hall. Her smile faltered, just for a breath. But Camille was a master of masks. She recovered quickly, floated across the room, and greeted them like old friends. "Alara," she said, lips tight. "Back so soon?" Alara smiled, cool, poised. "Some truths have a way of finding their way back." Camille glanced at Graham, her eyes narrowing. "And what role are you playing tonight?" "The one where I stand beside the woman who tells the truth," he replied evenly. Camille's jaw tensed. "You two really should be more careful about making enemies." "We're not making enemies," Alara said softly. "We're revealing them." Then Graham stepped forward, raising his hand. The room quieted. A microphone was placed in front of him. The orchestra dimmed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Graham began, his voice steady, Tonight isn't just a celebration of philanthropy. It's also a moment of truth. Camille's smile froze. I stand here tonight, he continued, to share a story about betrayal, about a family that was destroyed by greed. A good man, Gregory Dalton, was framed. His daughter, Alara Dalton, was erased, and the woman who orchestrated it stands among us. Gasps spread across the room like fire. Graham turned to Alara. She stepped forward. With trembling hands, she opened the folder and began to read. Each word struck like lightning. Names, numbers, dates, signatures, Camille's fingerprints on every crooked deal. People turned, whispered. Some began recording. Camille's world cracked. This is slander, she hissed. You'll regret this. No, Alara said, her voice breaking just slightly. The only thing I regret is staying silent for so long. At that moment, two uniformed officers entered the hall. A woman in a dark blazer followed, a prosecutor. Camille Harrington, the officer said, you're under arrest for financial fraud, falsifying records, and obstruction of justice. Camille backed away. This is a mistake. I'm Camille Harrington. But the handcuffs clicked, and the crowd watched as the queen of the social elite was led away, heels clicking against marble, head down, reputation in ruins. As the doors closed behind her, Alara exhaled a breath she'd been holding for years. The silence was deep, then applause, soft at first, then growing. People clapped, not for scandal, not for spectacle, but for truth, for courage. And in the middle of it all stood Alara, shaking, tearful, but free. She turned to Graham, and for the first time in a long time, allowed herself to lean into someone's arms. You did it, he whispered. No, she said quietly. We did. And friends, that was the beginning of the healing. The moment when a woman who had been silenced stood up and roared. When a man who had once turned away from truth chose to walk beside it. When justice, long delayed, finally knocked. But there's more to this story, because after the truth comes out, comes the question, what now? And that answer, well, it's what love stories are made of. So stay with me, because Alara's journey isn't over, and neither is Graham's. The truth has a way of burning everything it touches. It can cleanse, yes, but it also leaves scars. And now, with Camille Harrington exposed and her empire crumbling, Alara Dalton stood in the smoldering ruins of a war she never asked for, but fought with every ounce of strength left in her heart. But this isn't the end of her story. No, this is where the real work begins. Because after you win a battle like that, you're left with more than victory. You're left with silence. You're left with grief. You're left with a question most of us don't know how to answer. Who am I now, when the fight is over? In the days following Camille's arrest, the media erupted. Alara's name was everywhere. Mystery woman unmasked billionaire, the headline screamed. News anchors speculated about her background, her connection to Gregory Dalton, her mysterious reappearance from obscurity. But behind the flashing cameras and digital noise, Alara sat quietly in a small hotel room, staring out the window at the city she once called home. She had fought so hard to reclaim her father's honor. And now, what? The past was behind her, but so was everything she had ever known. It was Graham who found her that evening, sitting on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, dressed in sweatpants and silence. He said nothing at first, just lowered himself beside her, handed her a warm cup of tea, and sat. I don't know how to be anything but angry, she whispered. You don't have to be anything, he said gently. Not tonight. She glanced at him, tired. You ever spend so long trying to be strong that when it's finally over, you don't even know how to breathe? He nodded slowly. Every day since I lost my father. And just like that, the space between them softened. Not with grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but with something stronger, understanding. Over the next few weeks, Graham stayed by her side. He didn't push. He didn't pry. He simply became the steady presence she never asked for but deeply needed. He protected her from the press. He defended her to business circles still clinging to Camille's lies. And quietly, without making a show of it, he began helping her imagine something new. A legacy that wasn't about revenge, but rebirth. Start something, he said one afternoon, placing a leather-bound folder on the coffee table between them. Your father built empires, so will you. But this will have your name on it. Alara blinked, confused. Inside the folder were outlines for a consulting firm, strategic investments, market analytics, a business model rooted in resilience, ethics, and vision. I didn't do this to become famous, she said. I know, he replied. That's why you should. And she didn't say yes right away, because after years of surviving, it's hard to trust new beginnings. But slowly, Alara found herself breathing again, dreaming again. She reached out to old professors, former clients of her father who had once trusted her name. She interviewed people like her, talented, overlooked, hungry for something real. And then, 3 months after the gala, Dalton Consulting opened its doors. The first day was quiet. No crowds, no headlines. Just Alara standing alone in the office she'd designed from scratch, her fingers trailing across the desk, her father's watch tucked in the drawer, her mother's picture near the window. It was more than an office. It was a promise. And Graham, well, he never stopped showing up. Morning coffee, late-night strategy sessions, the occasional bouquet with a sticky note that read, "You didn't need saving, but I still thank you for saving me." But listener, healing isn't linear. And love? Love is not always soft. One evening as they stood by the window of her new office overlooking the city, Graham turned to her and said, "I want to be more than your business partner." Alara's breath caught. She'd known it was coming, but her heart wasn't ready. I, I don't know how to be someone's anything anymore, she whispered. You don't have to know, he replied. You just have to be honest. She turned away, her throat tight. I can't lose myself again. I finally just got her back. And listener, haven't we all been there? At the edge of something good, but too afraid to trust it? But Graham didn't walk away. He didn't rush her. Instead, he said something simple, something real. I'll wait. So now, friends, I want to ask you something. If you're listening right now, would you leave a comment just to let Alara know she's not alone? Write "Keep going, Alara" in the comments to remind her, and maybe yourself, that starting over is not weakness. It's courage, because every time she questions if she's strong enough, your words will be there, and she's going to need them, because not everyone was happy to see Camille fall. There were whispers, investors with ties to the Harrington name, former allies who began to push back, questioning Alara's credibility, anonymous threats sent to her inbox, a scratched message on her car that read, "You don't belong here." It shook her, but it didn't break her. Instead, she called a team meeting. She stood in front of her staff, 6 young professionals who had believed in her from day one, and said, I didn't come this far to back the Honestin. If they want to fight, they'll get one. But it won't be dirty, it won't be loud. It'll be done with the one thing they can't fake, integrity. And listener, they rose for her, every single one of them. The next week, Dalton Consulting secured its first major contract, a tech startup on the verge of collapse. Alara not only saved the company, she restructured it from the ground up. Investors noticed, clients followed, and the whispers, they got quieter. Not because the opposition disappeared, but because Alara got louder, not with her voice, but with her results. And Graham, he was still there, always one step behind, always one step ahead, never trying to lead her, just choosing to walk beside her. And one evening, when she finally found the courage, she looked him in the eye and said, I think I'm ready to stop running. He smiled, eyes filled with something between the relief and reverence. I've been here the whole time. They didn't rush into each other's arms. They didn't need to. They simply sat on the office couch, side by side, watching the sunset over the skyline they had both been shaped by. Enemies no more, partners, survivors, maybe something more. So if you're still with me, dear friend, take a moment to type "to new beginnings" in the comments. Because Alara's story reminds us that healing isn't a destination, it's a road. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is keep walking. The next chapter? Well, that's for another night. But I promise you, it's worth hearing. Because the best stories aren't just about what we lose, they're about what we build together. Dear listener, Have you ever looked at someone and realized that the very person you once held at arm's length is the only one who's ever truly seen you? That's what this chapter is about. It's about quiet healing, about becoming partners not through grand gestures, but through steady presence, about two people who started off as strangers in a charade and ended up discovering something real in the ruins. If you've ever felt broken and unsure of what comes next, I invite you to lean into this part of the story. Because sometimes love doesn't roar. Sometimes it waits, patient, gentle, and determined to stay. The scandal had passed like a storm that ripped through the city, exposing every brittle bone beneath marble columns and expensive smiles. Camille Harrington was gone, arrested, disgraced, silenced. Her name, once synonymous with prestige, now lay in the ash heap of betrayal. And in her place stood Isabella Deo, no longer hidden, no longer voiceless. She had won. But victories like hers don't come without cost. In the quiet that followed, Isabella found herself standing at the edge of something far more terrifying than Camille's wrath, a blank future. She had no home, no title, no pre-approved destiny to step into. All she had was herself, and a man named William Lancaster who wouldn't stop showing up. In the weeks after the gala, William did what most powerful men never do. He stepped back, but stayed close. He didn't push, didn't smother. He simply made space. He'd leave coffee outside her hotel door with handwritten notes. Just in case today feels heavy. He sent her articles about upcoming investments, sometimes scribbled with, "You'd crush this." And on the nights he knew she hadn't eaten, he showed up with takeout and 2 forks. No questions, no demands. Isabella didn't know what to make of him. At first, she kept her guard high. She had survived too many people who smiled while sharpening their knives. She was used to being used, first by society, then by desperation, and worst of all, by hope. But William, he wasn't trying to fix her. He just didn't want her to be alone. It took her weeks to even consider his offer. "Start something," he had said, "something that belongs to you." At first, she laughed. What could she start with nothing but a broken name and borrowed courage? But the idea lingered. Until one morning, Isabella walked into an empty office space on the east side of the city. Dust still clung to the floorboards. The walls were bare, but she saw something there, a possibility, a future built not from vengeance, but vision. She signed the lease that same afternoon. Dalto Strategies was born, not just as a business, but as a declaration. She started small, a one-room setup, one assistant, one laptop. But what she had in her heart was more than enough: clarity, hunger, purpose. She wasn't interested in competing with titans. She was building for the forgotten. She began consulting for startups run by single mothers, for young inventors without trust funds, for people like the version of herself who once had to sleep in a bus station. And William, he was never far, but never in the way. He introduced her to people, but never spoke for her. He offered resources, but never dictated how they were used. He celebrated her small victories with the same joy others saved for empires. One night after landing her third client, Isabella found herself pacing her office barefoot, hair in a messy bun, laughing at something absurd on the news, when William walked in holding a bottle of wine. "You look like a CEO," he said with a grin. She rolled her eyes. "I look like a woman who hasn't slept in 2 days." He poured 2 glasses. "Even better. You're becoming unstoppable." They toasted, paper cups clinking under flickering lights. And for the first time in a long time, Isabella allowed herself to feel something besides survival. She felt safe, seen. After that night, things changed, not all at once, but gently, like spring after a brutal winter. They began spending more time together, not just in offices or boardrooms, but in quiet corners of the world. Walks through farmers' markets, late-night talks in the park, coffee runs that turned into hours of laughter. And still, he never asked for anything. But Isabella could feel it building, in the quiet moments, in the way his eyes lingered just a second too long, in the way her hands stopped trembling when he reached for them. She began to soften. One rainy afternoon, they sat inside her office, watching the storm spill down the windows. She had just come back from a difficult client meeting. Her pitch had been rejected. She felt small, exposed. "I'm not cut out for this," she said, her voice barely audible. William looked at her, serious now. Don't you dare say that. She blinked, startled. Isabella, I've watched you fight harder than anyone I know. You rebuilt yourself with blood and bruises. You didn't just walk back into the world. You kicked down the door. You're more than cut out for this. You were born for this. She turned away, her throat tight. Why do you believe in me so much? And William, without hesitation, said, because I'm falling in love with you. Time stopped. The storm outside faded into silence. And for the first time since they met, Isabella couldn't hide behind strength or sarcasm. She cried, not because she was weak, but because someone had finally seen her, not the warrior, not the strategist, not the story in the headlines, just her. She didn't say it back that night. She wasn't ready. But she didn't need to. William waited, and he kept waiting. Not to be loved, but to be trusted. Over the months, as their company grew, so did their connection. They worked side by side, sometimes in perfect harmony, sometimes arguing over spreadsheets and deadlines, but always coming back to the same truth. They needed each other, not just for business, not just for closure, but for something deeper. One night, after a long charity gala, Isabella leaned against the balcony of his penthouse, looking out over the glowing skyline. You know what scares me the most? She asked. William stood behind her, hands in his pockets. What? That I might finally be happy. He stepped closer. And why does that scare you? Because I've lived so long in survival, I don't know what to do with peace. William reached for her hand. Then let's figure it out together. And that night, for the first time, she kissed him. No more walls, no more waiting. It was slow, tender. Not a fireworks kiss, but the kind that builds a home in your heart. That kiss changed everything. They were no longer pretending, no longer circling each other like maybe and what if. They were becoming partners. In life, in love. From enemies to something real. So now, if you're still with me, if you've felt every ache in Isabella's journey, leave a comment that says you deserve this, Isabella. Because after everything she's endured, after every night she fell asleep wondering if love would ever find her again, she's finally standing in a place where it has. And maybe that comment isn't just for her. Maybe it's for you too, because sometimes we all need to hear it. You deserve this. A new beginning, a second chance. A love that doesn't ask you to shrink or shift. Just someone who sees you and stays. And that's what William became. Not her savior, but her witness. The man who stood beside her. Not when it was easy, but when she was still finding her way back to herself. From the ruins of betrayal, they built something new. Not perfect, but honest. And maybe, just maybe, that's all any of us are looking for. So stay with me, because the next chapter, it's the one where they dream together. Dear listener, if you've made it this far, I want to thank you, because you've walked every step with Isabella and William, from heartbreak to healing, from suspicion to trust, from pain to the promise of something more. You've seen them fall, rise, and rebuild not just their lives, but themselves. And now it's time to bring their story home, not with a bang, but with something gentler, something truer. A quiet golden ending, wrapped not in diamonds or grand declarations, but in laughter, love, in the simple, sacred joy of family. The beach was quiet that day, the kind of quiet that hums, soft and sacred, just after the sun has begun to climb. Gentle waves kissed the shore, and the sky was painted in soft watercolor blues. Seagulls circled far overhead, but down near the rocks, everything was still. Isabella stood barefoot in the sand, her white linen dress brushing just above her ankles, her hands resting gently on her rounded stomach. The breeze lifted her hair from her shoulders, and her eyes, filled with a quiet glow, stayed fixed on the water. William came up behind her, wrapping his arms slowly around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. 6 weeks, she murmured. He smiled, kissing the side of her neck. 6 weeks until the chaos begins. Isabella chuckled, her hands finding his. Chaos. Or joy. He turned her gently to face him, pressing his forehead to hers. Both, probably. But if I'm living it with you, I'll take it. They stood like that for a while, in that warm stillness that only lovers who've weathered the storm can know. Because theirs wasn't a love built on convenience. It had been tested, broken, reforged in fire. And now here they were, married, expecting twins, and finally at peace. Their wedding had taken place on this very beach, not long after Isabella had said yes to William's proposal. It wasn't a grand society affair, no paparazzi, no golden chandeliers or embroidered guest lists, just a circle of close friends, the hush of the ocean, and a sky full of stars. Isabella had walked barefoot down the aisle, her dress simple, her heart open. And when she reached William, he had whispered so only she could hear, "You're the miracle I didn't know I needed." And they exchanged vows like promises whispered between soulmates, not to impress, but to affirm, to hold, to keep. And when they kissed, even the waves seemed to pause for a moment. After the ceremony, they spent days in a little seaside cabin, cooking barefoot, reading on the porch, dancing in the kitchen to old jazz records. And when they came home, they didn't return to a castle. They built a home. One with soft throws on the couch, the scent of vanilla and cinnamon drifting through the rooms, framed photographs lining the hallway, some new, some old, all real. On one wall hung a portrait of Isabella's parents, their smiles frozen in time. On another, William's mother laughing in a garden with a bouquet in her hands. It mattered to them, honoring the past without being trapped in it. They planted a small garden together. Tomatoes, basil, lemon balm. William joked he had no idea what to do with herbs, but Isabella taught him to make pasta from scratch and toss it with olive oil and fresh leaves. They had dinners by candlelight, even when they were exhausted, just to hold hands and say, "We made it through another day." And then came the morning Isabella stood in the bathroom, staring at two pink lines on a test. She didn't cry, not right away. She just sat down on the tile floor, clutching the test to her chest, heart pounding like a drum in her ears. She had been told for years by fear, by doubt, by doctors whispering vague statistics, that she might never have children. The stress, the trauma, the years spent fighting and scraping her way out of darkness. And yet, here it was. Life. She called William into the room, holding out the test with shaking hands. He didn't speak, he just looked at her. And then he knelt down, took her hands, and whispered, "You're going to be the most incredible mother." Weeks later, they found out it was twins, a boy and a girl. William had laughed so hard he nearly dropped his phone on the ultrasound technician. Isabella had just sat there, wide-eyed, her hand covering her mouth. She whispered, "Two?" And William, tears in his eyes, simply said, "The universe is making up for lost time." From that moment forward, they became something more than lovers, more than partners. They became parents before their children had even arrived. William started waking up early to read parenting books. He even took baby CPR classes, surprising Isabella with his overly highlighted notes. He repainted the nursery 3 times before finally settling on a soft sky blue theme with floating clouds and silver stars. Isabella teased him about his obsession with rocking chairs, but deep down, she adored how devoted he was. And Isabella? She glowed, not just from the pregnancy, but from freedom, from finally allowing herself to rest, to receive love instead of fighting it off like a cornered animal. She took long walks through their garden, humming lullabies she hadn't realized she remembered. She sewed little booties from leftover yarn. She painted a mural in the nursery herself, a tree with strong roots and 2 small birds resting on a branch. She told William, "That's us, and they're our babies." And listener, if you've been with us from the beginning, you know why this matters so deeply. Isabella wasn't just building a nursery. She was reclaiming a future she thought she'd never have. A future with warmth, with laughter, with family. One night, a week before the twins were due, William found her outside on the porch, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. The moon hung low in the sky and the air smelled like jasmine. He rushed to her, kneeling in front of her. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" She nodded, wiping her face. "I'm just overwhelmed. Not in a bad way. It's just, for so long, I didn't think I'd get here. I didn't think I'd survive. I thought I'd always be running or hiding or fighting. But now I'm here, and I'm safe, and I'm loved, and I'm still not used to it." William took her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her tears away. "You don't have to get used to it," he said. "You just have to let it in." She kissed him, soft and slow, and whispered, "I already have." And so, dear friend, here is where we leave them. A couple who began as enemies, turned allies, became lovers, and now soon would be parents. Their life wasn't perfect. It had its storms and stumbles, but it was real, honest, built on forgiveness and choice. And most of all, built on love that didn't demand or conquer, but remained. So if you felt something on this journey, if Isabella's courage moved you, or William's growth softened your heart, leave a comment below that says, you've earned your happy ending. Because they did. They walked through the fire and didn't let it burn them down. They found each other in the ashes, and together, they rose. And now they wait. For laughter in the early hours, for tiny fingers in midnight feedings, for the chaos, yes, but more than that, for the joy. So take this final breath with them under that golden sun, beside the sea that witnessed their beginning. Because they're not running anymore. They're home. And this is only the beginning of the most beautiful chapter yet. Dear listener, if this story touched your heart, then maybe it's because you saw a piece of yourself in Isabella. Maybe, like her, you've had to fight harder than most. Maybe you've been betrayed, overlooked, or made to believe you weren't enough. But here's what Isabella's journey teaches us. You are not your past. You are not the mistakes others made that affected you. You are not broken beyond repair. Even in the quiet of your hardest nights, you're still worthy of love, of peace, of a second chance. Healing takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And sometimes it shows up not in big, loud victories, but in soft, steady hands that hold you when you finally stop running. Real love is patient. It doesn't fix you. It stands beside you while you fix yourself. And when you're ready, it's still there waiting. If Isabella's story gave you hope, please give her some love in the comments. Type, "You've earned your happy ending," to let her know you were with her every step of the way. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories that heal, that stir something deep in the soul, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. When you do, you're not just supporting the story, you're joining a family of people who believe in the power of resilience, redemption, and real love. Thank you for listening. And remember, no matter where you are on your journey, you're not alone. We'll see you in the next story.